let's consider now, how do we implement project governance? How do we do it in reality? So I call this topic 6Q governance applied to portfolio management. Now, we'll start by recognizing some of the language that exists in this space. The Office of Government Commerce, OGC, has something they call P3O, Project Program Portfolio Office. Many people call it a PMO, Project Management Office, but the OGC people probably have gone furthest in recognizing it's a portfolio, program, and project office. So they call it a P3O rather than a PMO. And they have many, many standards, which I think actually confuse things. But again, let's just recognize what currently exists. There's a Prince2 project management standard. They have something called an MSP program management standard. They've got a portfolio guide, and they have a P3O guide. A project management office, or a portfolio management office, or a program management office. So there are all these different standards and various maturity models as well. None of them have been proven to improve performance. So I want to acknowledge them, but move on. Don't think that because I don't talk about these very fancy words that I'm behind the times. Actually, we need to recognize what definitely works, what might work, and what doesn't work. At the moment, the P3O might work, but there's no real evidence. In contrast, 6Q project governance has been matched against a very large database of change projects over the last 10 to 15 years. We matched the 6Q questions against the change project data points, and we found strong evidence that following these 6 questions leads to higher customer satisfaction, higher revenue, and reduced costs. So there is evidence in the case of 6Q project governance, no evidence in the case of any other standard that I've heard of. So as a reminder, hopefully you've seen the 6Q governance standard already, but as a reminder, the first question is, what are we trying to achieve? A project is suggested. We know we're trying to get some kind of change. What is the change? How does that align with our strategy? And we know that 67% of the time there's a business case, but 27% of that time it's been exaggerated. So really only 40% of the time do we really know what we're trying to achieve. Question 1, what are we trying to achieve? Question 2, how much change is required? Is this dotted area big, or is this dotted area small? If it's modest, you can go ahead without too much fear. But if the dotted area is huge, you need to be very sure of yourself that your organization can tackle that much change. 40% of the time we consider it, 60% of the time we do not. So question 1 and question 2 are very, very important. When you answer question 2, you will realize it's hardly ever a single project. It's almost always, we do one project, maybe that's an engineering project, but then we need to do many, many change projects, behavior change projects, get the public to behave in a certain way, get your staff to behave in a different way, get the customers to accept a new way of doing things. So it's not just a technical project, hardly ever. It's almost always a program of projects. So not one chevron here, but many, many chevrons. Once we realize the scale of change, question 2, question 3, who's going to drive this? Who's got the right passion and the right authority to get so many people to change? We need to have the right sponsor. Question 4, how do we measure success? 67% of the time we measure on time, on budget. Okay, it's not so bad. Only 33% of the time do we measure the real performance. Did we reduce costs? Did we increase revenue? We should be measuring something like customer satisfaction. That's the real measure of performance. Once the project has started, is anybody tracking our culture? Is anyone tracking our risks being raised as we start the continue with the project? Because hardly ever can you follow a project plan exactly. Almost always something unexpected happens. When that unexpected things happen, there will be new issues, there'll be new risks. We need to change the project plan. There's some very famous research. Project plans are nothing. Changing project plans is everything. So the ability to change your project plan to react to emergent events is crucial for question 5. Do we have the right culture where these issues are discussed? And finally, question 6, are we on track to realizing the benefits? Yes or no? So that's 6Q project governance. I've developed a template to help people answer the questions. If they don't want to rely on the high level question, what's the benefit? We can answer some sub questions. Are we clear on our outcomes? Is there a consistent understanding of the outcomes? If our outcomes have evolved since initiation, has there been a formal acknowledgement of changes? Are our project program priorities consistent with our corporate objectives? So we can answer that red, orange, or green. With question 1 is under control. Then question 2, change. Are we sure we understand how much change is required to realize the outcomes? Are we sure? Have we planned for the entire program of work and needed to realize our outcomes? Because if we only do the building the bridge, but we don't get the people to change their behavior, that's not going to work. We need to have the entire program. It doesn't matter if we do it all this year, but as long as we know that the total program of work is needed. Have we got the support of all the key stakeholders? And then finally, have we adequately addressed all the other risks? Change is the biggest risk, but once you've addressed the change issue, what about the other risks? Because they're all change projects. Do we have the right sponsor? Question 3. Does the sponsor believe in the outcome? In their gut? Are they committed? Are they passionate about driving through the change? Does the sponsor have the necessary authority and influence to drive the change? Does the sponsor have the competence and the experience to drive through the change? All very difficult questions. If you don't have the right sponsor, if you don't have the right top management support, don't start the project. Don't start the project. It's not worth it. Question 4, measures. Are we measuring the outcomes rather than the outputs? Outputs come in on time, on budget. That's fine. Are we measuring the outcomes? Customer satisfaction, cost, revenue. If you're a government department, in an education department, literacy, numeracy. If you're a police department, reduction in crime. If you're a health department, decrease in the waiting list, increase in health outcomes. So we need to be measuring the outcomes, not the outputs. And then whatever we are measuring, are they motivating? We can't choose a measure like reduced staff. Nobody's going to work with that. Why should I work hard to reduce my staff, to reduce my time, to maybe so that I get fired? No, that may be an appropriate measure, but not a motivating measure. So the two have to go together. Culture. Is there a culture that encourages issues and risks to be raised? And maybe a way of measuring that is the number of new issues raised every week. If there are no new issues every week, that's a problem. Maybe they're lying. Maybe they're blinded. Are decision makers giving priorities to the issues and risks that may affect the outcomes? Because not every issue is important, but the ones that make a difference to the outcome, we have to act on it. So is the top manager, is the sponsor, are people changing whenever we recognize an issue that makes a difference? Or if after the discussion, maybe nothing's, it's not important, and we say, we've discussed it. It's not important to reducing costs. So we carry on. The person who raised the issue is satisfied because somebody talked about it. They would have said something like, good, glad you mentioned it, but it's not important for the outcome we're chasing after. That's fine. But if they realize something is very important and nobody acts on it, they won't raise the next issue. Everyone gets tested on an ongoing basis. Monitoring. So are questions being asked to ensure the right information is being provided? Is monitoring independent of the sponsor? The sponsor will be one of the last people to recognize it's going wrong because they are passionate, driven to make the thing happen. So somebody such as a PMO, such as an auditor, such as a consultant needs to come in and look at the project and give feedback. So is monitoring independent of the sponsor and the project team? Are projects canceled or rescoped when the outcomes can't be realized? So these are some of the questions we could be answering if we want to know if our 6Q are being addressed properly. The tools on the right-hand side of this template are particular to an organization that I work with. So I won't talk about those in this particular lecture. Okay, I'll stop here so you can have a break, and then we'll talk about formal governance using software.